Natural selection only acts on the population's heritable traits, selecting for beneficial alleles and thus increasing their frequency in the population, while selecting against deleterious alleles and thereby decreasing their frequency. Scientists call this process adaptive evolution. So we hear the phrase survival of the fittest, but most people misuse this phrase. Take these two deer. Which one is more fit? You probably would say the left one. But what if he is sterile or loses a fight to another buck or gets caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, middle of an earthquake, a landslide, what have you? He's going to end up having fewer offspring, if any. Same with these trees. Is being taller always better? Could just be that the tallest tree gets struck by lightning before they even get a chance to produce seeds. Evolutionary fitness has more to do with the amount of viable offspring you make, no matter how awesome your genes are, no matter how big, brawny, intelligent, fast you are. None of that matters if you cannot pass on your genes to the next generation. So while individuals cannot evolve, natural selection can affect individuals. Those with beneficial alleles will, in turn, have more offspring, increasing their evolutionary fitness. Those with deleterious alleles will not survive to adulthood and therefore will not pass on these genes, lowering their evolutionary fitness. Realistically, fitness is not absolute, but relative to other members of a population. An individual does not have a fitness score, they simply are more fit or less fit as compared to other members of a population. Adaptive evolution takes on several different patterns: stabilizing selection, directional selection, diversifying selection, and sexual selection. Let's start with stabilizing selection first. Stabilizing selection occurs when intermediate phenotypes are selected for, and deviations from this are selected against. This leads to a decreased genetic variance because the variants provide no selective advantage. So say that a tree frog population in a forest consisted of frogs that tend to be a particular shade of green to help with camouflage in the tree leaves. Any deviation of that shade of green will cause the frog to stick out and easily be seen by predators. Not that the particular shade we see here, these frogs are going to be immune from being eaten, but they're less likely to be so. In humans, birth weight tends to be between 6 to 9.5 pounds. This is because if a baby is born less than 5 pounds, it's usually premature and not developed. And before modern medicine, this led to the death of a baby. If the child was greater than 9 pounds, it posed a danger to the mother as she would not be able to deliver the baby vaginally. Again, before modern medicine, this could lead to the death of a mother and a child. So being intermediate in weight is more advantageous for the mother and child, and thus an example of stabilizing selection in humans. So directional selection occurs when one phenotype is selected for and the opposite is selected against. Over time, this leads to the species to harbor this advantageous phenotype. Earlier, I mentioned that the peppered moths of England, that's an example of this, but let's do another example concerning dragonfly body size. So in a pond with the dragonfly population and a species of fish, the dragonflies are food for the fish. Note that the smaller and larger dragonflies exist. Notice that the larger dragonflies are more likely to be eaten. Why is that? They're slower. Smaller dragonflies with smaller body sizes are able to evade capture much easier. So we would expect over time that the body size of these dragonflies would shrink. An example of directional selection in humans is the volume of our cranium or brain case has increased over millennia to harbor a larger cerebrum. And we can see that by looking at fossil human skulls. Diversifying selection occurs when two extreme phenotypes on a spectrum make organisms more fit than those with intermediate phenotypes. Take two populations of snails, those that live in woodlands and those that live in grassier habitats. It's no surprise why the woodland snails are darker in coloration, and if they sneak in the grassier areas, they're more likely to be eaten. Same goes for the lighter colored snails. Living in grassier conditions, entering the woodlands poses a risk as well. Occasionally, an intermediate form can show up in a mating between these two snail populations, but their coloration is disadvantageous in either environment. This, of course, leads to more diversification of genes. Human skin coloration between Europeans and Africans is an example of diversifying selection. Having a semi-dark skin coloration in Africa, where there's more direct sunlight, can expose a person to more harmful ultraviolet radiation. Please keep in mind this is before the use of sunscreen and protective clothing. Ever notice that some species have differences in physical traits of males and females? Even in humans, males on average are larger than females. This is called sexual dimorphism and is the result of sexual selection. Sexual selection is a form of natural selection that indicates an individual's reproductive success by how they obtain a mating partner. In deer, females often choose males with the best genes, usually by the ability to fight off other males and defend a territory, aka the bigger the antlers, the more likely their genes are. So these two males come in contact during deer rutting season, and they're going to fight over territory and partners. A fight can either end in death for one of the deer, or the inferior male just runs off. Females choose the male based on his traits, which allow him to defend a territory, and he is able to pass his genes on to the next generation. Through sexual selection, it is more common that deer will have bigger antlers and more muscle mass, at least the males. Many of the features of sexual dimorphism have nothing to do with survival, such as a male lion's mane, but it helps it acquire a mate. Other times, certain features in organisms actually can impede survival. Turkeys, peacocks, and grouses, as well as many other ground birds, attract females by displaying their feathers. These larger feathers not only slow the males down, but makes them an easy target for predators. To females, males that survive these risks must have better genes than those that don't. This is called the handicap principle. Females may choose mates on the basis of physical characteristics that signal male genetic quality. They can either be physical appearances or ability to acquire resources. This is known as the good gene hypothesis. For example, in many species, females prefer to mate with males that care for young or that provide the resources required to produce eggs. If you were a female hummingbird, who would you rather mate with? The guy with resources or the guy with fewer? To her, the choice is clear. In essence, at least across many animals with sexual dimorphism, it is thought that females must be choosy on who they mate with, since she harbors fewer gametes in her lifetime than males. Likewise, males have to be competitive with other males in order to acquire mates. So now that we know how species evolve, how do scientists organize life to display these evolutionary relationships, leading down to the common ancestor of all life, the first cell? In our next chapter, we're going to find out how.